All right, welcome everyone to the December 6, 2021 Board of Directors meeting for MSAD 51. I hope everybody's enjoying steamy, foggy night outside. It's kind of beautiful. One of the things I wanted to start our evening off with is just to ground us and remind us of why we are here, which is to read our mission statement. And then I'm going to pass it off to Jason Record for recognition tonight. MSAD 51's mission is to guide all students as they acquire enthusiasm for learning, assume responsibility for their education, achieve academic excellence, and discover and attain their personal best. I can't remember the last time we read that out loud, so it was a recommendation from Jeff, and I took it as a good one. Jason?
So tonight, we'd like to recognize Don Foster and his crew for his efforts for the bus driver training that they've done recently. So I wanted to speak on behalf of Don because I joined that class recently. So if you don't know, the district and Don and his folks have put together a training course, not only for Cumberland and North Yarmouth folks, but other folks. So there's people from Freeport and people from Falmouth in the class, and the idea was just to help to train bus drivers everywhere to sort of help with the issues going on with the bus driver shortage. And so Don is a trainer and has been for quite some time. So if you might not know, Don has been with our district since 1991. Don was the president of the Maine Association for Pupil Transportation for 8 years. He's been training bus drivers since the 1980s, and as I understand it, after he left Freeport, he more or less helped write the manual on training bus drivers in this state. To say he's been involved for a long time is an understatement. He's done a number of classes previously in this district, and most recently has helped with this training class to help with the driver shortage. Also, coming up in February, the state, or I guess it may be a federal law that might be changing where there's significant hurdles coming up for becoming a bus driver, in that you may have to incur $6,000 or $7,000 worth of a cost to go to a school to get the training. And Don and the district got set up so that Don can be one of the official trainers for that new program, and the district is one of the facilities for that program. So even if that law goes through, we're set up to do these classes again for people in the community and surrounding communities, and those people don't have to incur that $6,000 or $7,000 worth of cost, and we can help with the driver shortage again. So being in this class, I've been so pleased with Don, just the way that he is, his demeanor, the hours that he's been putting in, after hours on Mondays and Wednesdays and Saturdays, helping people drive. It's fantastic. His other folks that have been helping, Becky Tuttle, Basil Morrison, Kevin Foster, fantastic. Basil had the secret to parallel parking a bus for me. I can tell you about that if you want to know sometime. But it's been fantastic, and all the things that Don does are much appreciated, and that's it. Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Don. And thank you, Jason, for that background, and it's awesome that you were able to attend and speak to it firsthand. So thanks for taking that. Okay, moving on to approval of minutes. Do I have a motion for November 15th, 2021?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
That was a great second, thank you. Any discussion on these minutes?
And that's as amended?
Yes. Okay. All in favor? Great. Thank you. Do we have anybody here for public comment this evening? Come on down.
Good evening, and
welcome to December in Maine, right? I guess I could like a little snow. I'm Hannah Berry. I am from Cumberland, and I am just here to speak personally, based on my recent couple experiences that I had. I will give my story very quickly, but I did read all of your email tonight, Porter, and I appreciate you keeping in mind sort of the overall morale of the community and the world that we live in. So very briefly, I traveled twice in the last week and a half. The first time was to Washington, D.C. for Thanksgiving, where my child presented on the first morning of our arrival with a runny nose, and my family proceeded to evict him from the house for 2 days. So on the one hand, you could have one symptom, and you can live in fear and keep someone out of your life. On the other hand, you could take a small risk rather, and include people in your world. Include them in your life. I have chosen to include all people in this pandemic. I've continued to work. I have continued to see friends and family in need. The second example was I flew to Florida, because after Thanksgiving, I needed a break. I was exiled from my family home on Thanksgiving. You can imagine it was exhausting. I go to Florida, stay at a hotel with one friend. It was the most relaxing time because nobody around me was anxious. We were all masking, we're all vaccinated, we're doing our part. But everybody I met, every stranger on the plane, every stranger at a restaurant, was warm and welcoming and not anxious, and it felt amazing. So going forward, Porter, I fully understand your message. I just want you to know that there are two sides. There's fear and there's warmth and compassion. And when my kids come home from school and tell me they got yelled at for not standing far enough away or not having the proper protocols, I'm not even sure what they're being yelled at for anymore, to be honest, but the day that the new variant hit the paper, my kids all came home and said, "What's going on?" Everyone was mad at school today. Something's happening. And I didn't even tell them. I told them then, but I didn't tell them before because it wasn't really that important. We're still doing our jobs. We're masking, we're washing, we're vaccinated. I just wish we could just relax a little and have a little fun and be more warm and welcoming. Because I can tell you personally, it feels better to go through your day when everyone approaches you with warmth and not fear. So, thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you. Is there anyone else for public comment this evening? Okay. So we will move on to communications. We have one item, unless we have others on the board that would like to speak or share anything. Jeff and I recently, along with Equity Committee co-chair Nick Whiston, met with Lawrence Alexander and discussed how we would kind of meet that promise as far as creating a public event that more of our community can engage with around the conversation of how do we support equity in our district. So you may have seen in the district newsletter a save the date message for January 11th. So we don't have all the details yet because we have to plan it all out, but most of it will be around a conversation around a district equity plan. And we look forward to making sure that as many people can attend. It will be a virtual event, so we're hoping that that is helpful, although we would like to be in person, but we're hoping that more people will be able to attend because of that. Do you want to add anything else, Jeff? Okay. All right, so please look for more information on that. It should be coming. We have our committee meeting on the 17th, and hopefully we should have an update on that shortly after. Does anyone else have anything for communications? All right. Presentations? We have none?
No.
All right, so we will move into our workshop where we will be meeting with or welcoming 2 members of Oak Point to join our conversation. So we're going to do this kind of the same way we did before, where we'll kind of loop around, try to make a horseshoe and have a conversations about grade configurations. Yeah, and I think Jeff is going to stream a couple of documents that were shared in regards to this conversation.
Are we going to move the tables or no?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean,
I like this.
it's a little easier when we're all kind of together.
Stand here.
Before and after.
You see the market close today? No, what happened? 600.
And I failed to mention that Susie is joining us as well. Sorry. Okay. Peter, do you want to start off the conversation about, just as an update from where the facilities committee left off?
The Facilities Committee met last Thursday, and we had Jeff, Scott, Don Foster, Julie Olson, and Susie, and Tyler from from Oak Point. And I think we spent a lot of time. First of all, Jeff brought us up to date on the enrollment study, which I think he'll do before we continue on the second part of it. And we spent about an hour and 5 minutes just discussing various and sundry options, and came to the point where we will be recommending to the full board tonight option 2, or a modified version of it. So Jeff, probably it would be good to just do a 30,000-foot thing on the enrollment study adjustments.
Sure. Thank you, Peter. Rebecca Wandell Consulting has provided us numbers for projections of our enrollment over the next 10 years to 2031-32. And we had asked Rebecca, or the board had wanted to make this a priority to get the numbers, most current numbers. Her last numbers were from 2019, so she just completed this study, and I just want to say this publicly, that these numbers are still being worked on. They're not complete, but I did ask her for her best numbers that she could give us in advance of this workshop, which she did. But she did want to make sure that people knew that there's a couple of outstanding areas that she is still reviewing, which could adjust the numbers slightly before the report is submitted incomplete. So the abbreviated report that she gave me, and the numbers that, based on the projections that she's given at this point, show that we would have 2,505 students in the year 2031-32. Right now, just to give you a foundation, we're at 2,100 students today, just over 2,100 students today. So that's about 400 students more that she is projecting over the next decade. And that is slightly less than the projections that she had given the board in 2019, 2 years ago, which was the last time that she updated her numbers. She did say that from the pandemic and COVID, this is very typical, that districts have experienced some student loss based on projections from 2 years ago, and that we have rebounded our enrollment from 2 years ago, which is a good thing, but that our projections are down from what she had originally projected 2 years ago. So I just want to make that adjustment. So based on those numbers, we plugged those new numbers into the chart so that people had the updated numbers, which aren't largely off quite, they're not terribly off from where we had predicted the numbers to be based on her old numbers, and then kind of moving those forward. So, but I think we have more solid numbers for you in the chart, and the projections going all the way through for the next 10 years.
So I think for the public out there that is watching this, we were concerned as the facility committee and the board to just make sure that this study didn't result in significant increases from the study that we were doing our preliminary work on sizing and such. And I think the important thing to know on that it didn't, that the numbers are slightly lower. And I think, Jennifer, to give you a little bit of credit, that way back when we did that first enrollment study, I know you had expressed some things that you thought that conditions might change at some point, that those might be a little too high, and I think, interestingly enough, your prophecy, though not by a great amount, has pretty much come to fruition. So, armed with that new information, everybody is familiar with the 5 options that were presented to you at the last meeting. We came up, Jeff came up with another option, which pretty much was what we would call the son, or being pronoun correct, daughter or son or daughter of Plan 2, where we still kept the PreK 3 configuration in North Yarmouth, but thought about setting up a separate building for pre-K and K. And as we get into the recommendation, we'll cover that a little bit more, and Tyler of Oak Point can give us some information. One of the members of the public brought up a scenario of why we shouldn't consider 2 neighborhood schools, one in Cumberland, obviously probably Wilson, and a new school in North Yarmouth, both being K through 5. We did do some consultation with both Susie and Julie, Jeff, and we tasked Jason to just dig a little deeper into it. And Jason, if you can give us a couple thoughts on that model.
So since our meeting, Scott and I also spent a fair amount of time talking about this, and I appreciate everybody on the board that's been through this before rehashing it. The neighborhood model was my first choice. It is not what I'm supporting at this point, but it was my first choice. I know there's people on the council and on the select board in both towns, they sort of like this model. And I think in a perfect world, it would be a great solution. The biggest factor, I'm trying to break it down to why it just doesn't make sense. The biggest thing for me, well, first of all, the 2 towns aren't the same size. Cumberland's about twice the size as North Yarmouth. And a resident brought up the point that we could change the geography, just move that line to whatever MIW and 4-5 could hold. We take that from Cumberland, draw a line, and the rest go to the new school. In theory, it could work. So we've talked through this on the facilities committee, and Scott and I have discussed, and Julie has weighed in. To me, the number one thing why it's hard for me to support is duplication of staff. So that would be things like OT, speech, PT, nurse, social work, potentially allied arts, and not only all of those positions, but the spaces for them in both places. So complete duplication. So we're not talking about, you know, a few $100,000. We're potentially talking about millions and an extra operating cost every year of that. So I think that's top of the list for me, hard to swallow. Number 2, Scott helped me understand this. So we have an obligation to being that we're an SAD, Cumberland and North Yarmouth are within that, and we have an obligation to service those students from a childcare standpoint. So regardless of if they live in North Yarmouth, their childcare might be in Cumberland, and we have to potentially deliver that child to the other place that isn't in their geography. So that creates potentially lots of extra busing. And I asked Scott, that number isn't a small number, that's a significant number. It's not 5% of the kids, it's much more than that. So beyond just childcare, you also have you know, split families, mom lives one place, dad lives the other, you got the same issue, extra busing. Number 3 on my list, in my mind, is I think there would be a significant reluctance for many in town, not all, but to split just the feel of things. I could argue both ways, but I think a lot of people will be resistant. And then along those lines, that geography line could change from year to year. So we're trying to balance the population between the two schools. And within Cumberland, you definitely would have a line drawn somewhere where potentially neighbors are going to different schools. And then there's going to be people trying to get into the other school, and what's the process of managing that? I think that could be just kind of harmful. And then last on my list, I think everybody's going to want the nice new shiny school. And that's going to create issues, I think, to some degree. So some of this other stuff I think could be managed. Scott said we can make anything work as far as busing goes, but the question is at what cost? And number 1 on the list being the duplication of staff, and then potentially extra buses and extra miles put on those buses. I'm back to option 2, and maybe someday we'll get to a perfect world where things are more balanced and we can look at neighborhoods again, but at this point, that's my synopsis.
Well, I think it's important. We had several people have talked about this over the years, so I think it was very important not to just poo-poo the thing, but to talk to our administrative experts and just see what, in this day and age, given the resources that we have to work with, what was going to work and what didn't. So the sum total of all this, that we were back to the 4-5 Wilson pre-K 3 model for the new school. But with a proviso, and Tyler at Oak Point will cover this, that what we want to do at the next stage, that we do want the board to endorse the 4-5 and the North Yarmouth model, with obviously the middle school reverting back to 6-8. But we also want Oak Point to do a couple different design models where and it may be a pod model, and Tyler can cover it more, where we do some isolation of the pre-K, but at the same time retain common utilities, driveways, heating systems, and all that. So, and I think the other thing with regard to Wilson, that we felt after all the adventures we had with site planning with the town of Cumberland, that any major addition to Wilson, which was a lot of the other plans, was going to involve site plan issues and traffic and everything else. So going forward, what we'll be recommending on that will be renovations not quite as extensive as in the plan that we put forward this summer for the on-site plan. We've already put in for approximately $1.5 million worth of energy-related upgrades, windows, doors, other things that we could possibly receive reimbursement. but from the state, but there will be additional renovations, but not to the extent that they were under the other plan. And as we get further on with this process, Oak Point will put those out and we'll have a number on it. So Tyler, if you could kind of fill us in, Tyler, Oak Point, on some of your thoughts on a pre-K 3 building at North Yarmouth.
Tyler, can I pause you for 1 sec before we go down there? Thank you, Peter. I just want to make sure that everybody has a chance to ask questions about enrollment before we assume that we all understand the same thing that facilities spent an hour or so talking about. And I know, Tom, that this is your world. So I'm guessing that you might have some.
I brought charts.
You made a chart. I knew it. All right. So maybe we can start with you, because I think it's worth a little bit further of a conversation.
Sure, and keeping in mind that what Jeff said before, that the estimates that we have are preliminary, we need to keep that in mind. I was encouraged by what we saw, what Rebecca shared with us. Is if you look at the totals for enrollment, it looks like it's just going up with no end in sight. But if you really dig into the increases at different grade levels, we're going to see a plateau in our pre-K through 3 enrollment by, I don't know, 2025, I think it was. And those students are going to continue to go through our schools, and our enrollment is going to continue to grow. But it does show that down the road, there is a plateau in sight, which is comforting. And something that I think if we allow in some buffers in some of these schools, so we're not outgrowing them as soon as we move in, taking a long-term view, can probably be in good shape and not have to worry already about what we're going to do, 15, 20 years down the road once we've outgrown these schools. So I've mapped out the different plans that we have here in terms of enrollment. And the one thing that I keep coming back to is putting preschoolers and kindergartners into a school with potentially 900 students or even 1,000 students if that pre-K limit goes up. Tyler, tell me if you want to save this conversation for later. I was wondering if the facilities committee could talk about the advantages of Plan 2 versus Plan 6, which would help us to avoid that problem.
Yeah, I think we spent a lot of time doing the same thing. So if we can just offer it up for any other questions or clarity around enrollment, and then maybe what we can do is shift into that. Because there is a lot of overlap, like they kind of feel like the same, but I think it, and we talked about that a lot, and I think that it will be helpful to get Oak Point's clarification on how they might be different.
Great, thanks.
Awesome. Does anybody else have questions or need for enrollment?
Yeah, just thank you. Being very simple, and I don't have a graph like Tom, so my apologies. So two things. Jeff, if you could just, so we've commissioned a number of space studies over time, and I think it's important to talk about the accuracy of Ms. Wandell's models over time as we've seen those. Could you comment on that?
Sure. So Rebecca was part of the team of PDI, which is not in business anymore because there was a retirement of the person who owned it. They did the numbers back in 2016. She's now a private consultant, and so she worked on our numbers in 2016. She worked on them in 2019, and now she's working on it again in 2021. And because she has been able to work with our district over time and look at those numbers and is familiar with looking at housing starts, looking at transfer ownership of homes from one person to another and what that looks like over time, looking at birth rates and having those connections in the community, I think we have found that her numbers and PDI's numbers from 2016 were spot on right before before COVID hit. In fact, it was almost down to a student how accurate her numbers have been. When COVID hit, like just about the majority of districts in Maine, obviously we saw a loss of students and that threw those projections off. So I have a lot of confidence in Rebecca. She also does a lot of projection studies in this area of Greater Portland. So she's well utilized by other school districts who are looking for similar information.
So my gently steering question was because in the past we've seen studies that absolutely landed in different places, but these ones have been pretty spot on for each study that she has done. I just.
They have been. And the other thing that she suggested, and it was not to get any more business, but she suggested that because of the flux of COVID right now, and also because of the changing landscape of this district, which has been changing for several years, she suggested doing an annual update for a couple more years, just to make sure that the numbers that she's giving us are super accurate. So that was a suggestion she gave me. And again, it could be an abbreviated report, much like she's given us this year.
And my last piece is, I don't even know if it's a question, but a comment. And you mentioned this in the second option, talking about if pre-K is mandated. And that concern, or the awareness of either state mandated or federally mandated that we have to do that is absolutely going to change the scope of the size of the school, right? Did you have a number in mind if pre-K expanded beyond what our model is?
Yeah, so pre-K is a moving target. Right now, the state is transferring 3- and 4-year-olds who have special needs to local school districts for authority, basically having fiscal and programming authority over children with special needs who are 3 and 4 years of age in the state. So that transfer is happening right now. So right now, it has been with the state. They've retained that authority for decades. And it's been shifting, and now we're seeing that shift happen. It doesn't mean that we have to have students in our public buildings. We can work with private partners to provide programming for children who have special needs who are 3 and 4 years old. Now, in our district, as we all know, and the board approved several years ago, we have a pre-K program that has 32 students enrolled. About half the students are children with special needs. The other half are students who are more typically performing in our school, and that's the model that we've used with CDS, and we've partnered with them. But if the state or the federal government down the road said you have to, they're mandating all 4-year-olds, for example, to be in your public school building, and you can't work with private providers, is to say that I don't think in this state I can foresee a future where that would happen, but if it did, there was a governor and a legislature who agreed on that, it would mean the number of students that we would have for kindergarten. You can just extrapolate what would that be for 4-year-olds. So we have 200 kindergartners, it's probably going to be 200 4-year-olds as well, or you can at least look at an estimate. So that's a significant increase. The numbers that I've provided on the chart, I did not use Rebecca's numbers of pre-K. I used 48 students because we know that our CDS, what it's now right now, CDS enrollment, is going up a little bit over the next couple of years. We've already looked at those numbers, and which means we need to bring 50% more students in who are typically performing. So just as a caution, I put in 3 classrooms of students instead of 2, which is 48 students. So those numbers that you see in the chart are based on 3 classrooms and not 2, with the idea that our CDS numbers are going up. Julie did give me that information. She's given that me before. She confirmed it for me last week. So I just, whether we have 2 or 3 classrooms in any given year, I just want to make sure everyone knows I've planned in 3 in this chart. But if it's mandated it's in a public school building, it could definitely look like a lot more students than what you see in this chart, because this is 48 students versus 200 students. You can add 150, I'm just making this up right now, but 150 students to these numbers to see what size school. So if we have a pre-K through 3 school, for example, 1 building, with 800 students in it right now, you can add 150 students to that if 4-year-olds were mandated to be part of a public school building. So we're at 950 students, just to give you an idea.
Thank you, Kevin. Anyone else have any questions about enrollment before we move on? Madison?
I don't know if it's necessarily enrollment or just kind of more looking at like the different plans. So I wasn't at the last meeting, so sorry if I kind of am rehashing these comments, but they're more comments and one question about it. One thing that I don't like too much about the idea of having another school in North Yarmouth is the fact that This those kids would lose access or as good access to the pool, the track, the performing arts center, like things that all of the schools being really close together can provide. They then kind of lose that. And then kind of bouncing off a couple things that Jason said, it does change like the feel of all of the schools. Like one thing that really attracted my family personally to the town when we were thinking about where we were going to move was the fact that all the schools were in one spot, which made it really nice, easy for us to walk to school. Like we have always walked to school up until I got a car. So that kind of changes that. And then my question kind of comes from this would probably be harder on families with multiple kids to drop off because then they have two locations to kind of cart to. Would we be helping with that? I don't know if that's something that I potentially missed, but yeah.
So we've talked about all of those things.
I'm glad. I'm so sorry.
No, not saying that you missed it, but all of those conversations have been happening in committees and things like that. And I think the concern about multiple kids in different grades and different locations has come up a lot. And it's something that this district has done before when they had NYMS and has done it well. And so there's a little bit of institutional knowledge as far as how that would work. I don't know, Scott, if you want to speak on that, but it's of course a valid concern, and we also can provide solutions for that. Scott, would you be able to speak to use of facilities for those kids that wouldn't be on campus?
Sure. In the past, we've actually transported students to the use of those facilities when there's been events that have taken place. So transporting over for swim. If, obviously, with this, if people wanted to sign out this space, we would look to transport them as well.
That's what I assumed. I was just kind of worried for quicker access. I mean, it's easier to walk up here than it is to get a bus, is I guess my concern. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Avery and then Peter.
Yeah, I just, Madison, you brought up the point that families would potentially have to bring their kids, all the way across into North Yarmouth, back into Cumberland to drop their kids off. I kind of like that because it encourages buses to be used, and that's, that's better for the environment when buses are being used opposed to, every family driving their kid into school. It's better for traffic, it's better for the environment, and a lot of connections that kids make with each other comes from the bus. So on that point,
You like it?
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. Peter.
Madison, regarding one campus, I mean, we just spent $250,000 to develop a one campus model that proved impractical, both of the town of Cumberland and such. So any major additions to anything on the one campus are not going to pass site plan muster with the town of Cumberland. And Tom, very good observations, and I think Tyler, I mean, we're one of the things that we're trying to do is come up with some kind of, one of our things is to come up with some kind of a model where we do have pre-K and K separate but connected. So as Tyler goes further, so trust me, we struggled with that one, and hopefully that's one of the little alternatives we can come up with as Oak Point does their magic.
Awesome. Jennifer?
All right. Jeff, I guess I have just a few questions. One being, you had said that Rebecca had mentioned that this isn't complete. Mm-hmm. Do you know what kind of numbers aren't complete on it, or do we think that, that we can kind of make decisions off of this, or do you?
Yeah, there's two things that she told me that she still feels is outstanding. There's something in PowerSchool, our student data system, that she wanted to confirm some numbers, and some of it was based on homeschooling numbers and trends. I think some of it was based on, it may have been private school enrollment, although we don't put that in PowerSchool, so I think she was double checking that. The biggest one that she was still checking on was the Cumberland housing numbers, and making sure that she's got all the most latest information that since the last 2 years. Okay. She does not feel like she has a complete picture about the housing you know, future plans in housing, what currently is happening with students. You know, in other words, there's been buildings in the last 2 years. How many students are really coming from those new housing projects, and what is projected?
Right.
And she just wants to really double check, and she's still working through those numbers with the town.
Okay.
So she was in the middle of doing that when I really kind of said, can you give us something here?
Okay.
And she felt like, okay, I just need to let you know, that part's not done.
Okay. Because you can see in her report that when the class sizes get to the 4th grade, they fall down in number.
Right.
And then they come back up in 5th grade. And I wouldn't think that's a trend that we would see in our school now. I mean, you would see kids in 9th grade, the numbers going down
Right.
because they're going to private school, or from K to 1, them going up because some people go to private kindergarten and then they come in. But the numbers aren't big, but they're like going down by 10 kids when we get to that level. So,
Yeah, and I think that was
So-
the part she was checking with Power School.
and probably
her
just
numbers.
going over it with a fine tooth comb too.
Yes.
Like the whole thing.
Right.
So hopefully it doesn't change a lot. The other thing that just to mention, when you were talking about if pre-K comes in as a federal or state mandated item, it doesn't mean that all parents are going to choose to send their child here. So when we're throwing out, we're going to have 200 more kids, or we're going to do this, some parents feel that at that age, they would rather go to a typical preschool environment or some sort of small environment. So
Absolutely.
it's not necessarily that all of a sudden they're going to pass something, Biden's going to pass it, and every parent is going to say, I want my 3-year-old on the bus at MIW. So we have to kind of cautiously, when we throw that around,
Absolutely.
that we're not bringing all of them into our world.
You're absolutely right.
I mean, we have to offer
Yes.
it, but if we got to that point, but at that level, I think parents are more open to make different choices for their children.
Yeah, and I think the other important thing about pre-K is that I have a hard time imagining where the state, I can't predict, but state and federal government would say, you have to have these children in your public school buildings, knowing the infrastructure across the nation. I think it's more predictable to think that if they mandated 4-year-olds are under the auspices of the public school system, that it would be working with private providers, having options available that where you would use funding to maybe offset with private provider students that are choosing to go there, parents are choosing. So I agree, I don't foresee that, but in a worst case scenario, you know, down the road, if it is mandated to all kids, and of course, parents always have an option, that's always there, but if a majority of the kids were to come, you know, what would we be expecting? And so I think that's why at the facilities meeting, I had thrown out the idea, which is really kind of option 6 with option 2, which is a separate pre-K facility on the same piece of property, whether connected or not connected, but at least it gives a smaller feel for pre-K, and if there was a need to expand pre-K down the road, you're expanding a smaller school and making it bigger instead of this huge school and making it even bigger. So I think that's why that discussion came up, and I threw that option 6 out with that in mind, because we just don't know what pre-K. I mean, at this point, our philosophy is keep it small, work with providers, but that's notwithstanding some down-the-road mandate that turns it differently. But I get your point.
And we live in a community where we have such good options within driving distance for these preschools. I mean, there's a lot of communities in Maine that don't have these options, and some of these state pushing it to make sure that they're getting into these preschools, at least on campus, is good, but just to keep that in mind.
Yeah, and I don't think the state of Maine, I mean, even the current governor was a big fan of pre-K, has always said it wouldn't be necessarily be in this public school building. It would just be access to pre-K through using public dollars, but it could be in the public school building, it could be in a private setting.
And we had a lot of these discussions, I think, when I came on the board.
Right.
When there were people in the community felt that we were looking to shut down their preschools, and we're not.
We're not.
I mean,
no.
we would rather leave
Right.
a lot of different options, so
And I
just to
put the
kind of chat.
48 students in as just a placeholder. It could be that we're only running 2 classes. Depends on, I just want to make sure we're covered for the numbers of CDS kids that might go up and down, and that number does go up and down a lot. So it could be 2 classrooms 1 year and 3 classrooms, and then back to 2 classrooms.
Thank you, Jennifer. Anyone else before we move on to Oak Point? Around enrollment or anything? Okay. So I think, Tyler Barter, if we can pass it off to you to help us talk through options 2 and 6, and just kind of bringing up the conversation that we had as a facilities committee that you were a part of.
Absolutely, and we're
Thank you.
happy to be here tonight, continuing on this. So I think there have been some good conversation already tonight about how the numbers actually look as they're moving down through, and we actually started looking at that 25 year is kind of our first year. That would be the kind of the anticipated opening date of a new facility. So that really became our baseline as we started to look through this. What we did was we took a hard look at what each individual year was going to be capacity-wise, making sure that we still felt that the site that is under contract is suitable for it. We're looking at a maximum enrollment based on these projections of around 830 to 840 students, and there's really no reason that we can't get that size school or combination of 1 plus 2 on that site. I think some of the challenges are going to be how we break this down to feel more like a small school, even though it's going to be housing anywhere from 10 to 11 classrooms per grade level. So some of the things that we've talked about through our facilities committee and also going back to our work here on the campus is really structuring this in a way that we don't create large, long classroom corridors. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we can do to help manage the feel of this facility. So it's starting to break these things down into anywhere from 4 to 5 classroom pods, little neighborhoods, all along the lines of giving a little bit more individuality to these pods. They can be set up and structured differently, and to reduce the overall scale and feeling of the building. One of the things I know that is going to be a challenge as we look at this, it's very similar to what we looked at the first North Yarmouth site, is that the buildable parts of this site tend to be a little bit longer. So Sarah and I have been looking at how these pods could be arranged on the site to minimize some of the travel times for our, the youngest learners in here, make sure the little legs can get to the classrooms in a reasonable and healthy manner from a front entrance. As we took a look at all of the enrollment projections that were given to us at the end of last week, the size of the building is going to be very similar to what we had started talking out for individual grade levels. So we're looking at that anywhere from 10 to 11 classrooms kind of at that high point. And I think the discussions that we'll want to have with the facilities committee and the other entities involved is how do we plan for the future? So we've got the ability here to work in some flex classrooms for permanent built space, but also being sympathetic on the site to make sure that we've allowed for future expansion here. And I think there's a lot more opportunity here than on campus to do that in a way that could be a building project instead of building a lot of excess capacity now, but planning a lot of the ability to add strategically to the building and overall keep the efficiency there. I think that overall what our goal is, as Jeff had mentioned, is to work through kind of that school within a school. So if it's an early childhood center and a grades 1 through 3, either function will be making sure that those youngest learners are in kind of their own environment, whether that's through some architecture in the building or 2 dedicated buildings. I think that we have that opportunity on this site. Awesome. You want to add anything, Sarah?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I agree with Tyler. We have been looking at different massings and how we can get sort of this cluster explosion, if you will, on the site so that we can create these smaller villages. And whether the one that we're looking at right now that we have been exploring is more a one building one that has a center kind of pod entryway, and then over to one side would be your younger learners, and then over to another side would be the 1st through 3rd, and then that would allow you to have some shared resources in between, because there should be some savings that way. But we're also going to look at the 2 separate buildings as well, which will get a little bit more tricky with circulation and drop-offs and playgrounds. So when you start taking one building and making 2 buildings on the site and having enough separation between them that it makes sense to actually separate them and not have them be stuck together, it really starts to eat up some of that, pavement area and some of the natural landscape. So that's going to be some of your balance there. Is it worth pulling the buildings apart if we can create this really kind of unique feeling when you come into the building that it does seem like 2 different buildings? If you do want to go the direction of the 2, how is that going to affect your site and your natural scape? That's going to be what the balance is for that. So I think we're still exploring that. It's a big school, so trying to get a lot of natural light into the building for all of the occupants and all the different classrooms, and still, not sprawl too far across the site is definitely our challenge.
Thank you both. So I kind of want to open it up to board members to ask some more questions about these 2 options. I think I know personally, when we talked about these 2 options, I just kept feeling like we were talking about the same thing. I was like, what's the difference? Either they're pods or they're apart, but we're still talking about the same amount of children and students and staff. So there is a lot of similarities there. But I also want to make sure that Susie is able to chime in about the educational value of this option as well. So we have you here for a reason. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, of course. Here. If I can get it out.
Nice job.
Thank you, Tyler. I think what I really stressed at the Facilities Committee meeting from an educational point of view is I absolutely loved some of our other models, but through conversation realized that adding to the Wilson School an addition was really something that was probably not wise to do for many reasons. So when we talked about this option, I could envision a K-1 section that was really designed for our youngest learners. So educationally, I think this makes sense. But as I said at facilities, I leave it in the hands of Oak Point to see what they can come up with so that it does have that small school feeling, because I think that's important.
Thank you.
Susie, just as you hand your mic back, when we went through this process a couple years ago, when we were talking about the school that we were going to build in North Yarmouth at that point, for some reason it sticks out in my mind when we were talking about groupings of grade levels that go together. We were really coming around to that 3rd grade shouldn't be with 1st and 2nd. It was the best situation to have it 3, 4, and 5 together. And maybe I remember or what that conversation was about, but that really kind of stuck in my mind. That curriculum kind of jives together at that point, the way that maybe some of the products that we use or the way that we kind of teach to those kids. Could you kind of speak to that and what the thought process is? I would hate to have the opportunity to mix up the grade levels and the groupings now and not do it properly, even though, the 4 or 5 has been together for so long. So.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Jennifer. If you look at the main learning results, they are broken down pre-K through 2, and then 3 through 5. So that's really what we were talking about, or I was talking about. I think none of these options really had, not many options had 3 through 5 together. So what I go back to is the Wilson School works to have 2nd and 3rd graders together. So it's not a bad thing to happen. In a perfect world, if we could have 3, 4, 5 and pre-K through 2, that would be great. The other thing about having more grade levels at one building is the ability to flex some of the, you might have a 2nd grader who really needs a challenge and needs to join 3rd grade, or a 3rd grader who really loves to read and wants to read to a 1st grade class. So there are some benefits of having larger or more grade levels together. Educationally, I think curriculum-wise, we absolutely can make it work because we currently are. But you do remember correctly.
And,
Go ahead.
and did we look at that when we were going, or, go ahead.
Yes, I was going to ask Tyler and Sarah if they wouldn't mind speaking to that, because I do think that was an option that was certainly viable until we started really talking about the Wilson School itself and how many students we could put in that facility, programming-wise, and then what kind of an addition we would need if we were looking at 3 grades versus 2 grades. So I wonder if they could talk about that.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Jeff. The Wilson School right now, as currently constructed, is really great for the estimated enrollment for about 2 grades. We could get a few more classrooms in there, but I don't think an additional full grade without an addition. We had some conversations with our traffic engineer, and there's a pretty low threshold for permanent addition and capacity at that building before we start triggering some of those MDOT improvements that had been brought up earlier. It's somewhere around 100 to 125 students in that building, which really doesn't get us the capacity that we need to put a full additional grade level in that building. We've taken a quick look at getting, either any 2 grades in there, 20 to 22 classrooms, and it fits really well with the program space, and then making up for some of that small group instruction space that's currently not in the facility. So I think, the concept of putting 2 grades in that building works really well.
Awesome, thank you. Who else has questions or feedback or?
I have a question. If each grade needs 10 classrooms, would you go up, so 5 on the first level and 5 on the second, to make it shorter hallways in doing the design, or is that?
We have not figured that all out.
Okay.
So it's been one of the challenges. I think the arching goal is to keep grade levels on the same floor. And then we would look to find what the best solution is, whether that's groups of 4 in a resource room. Is it pods of 5 with special education, other support spaces around them? We have maybe 10 or 15 or maybe more options kind of going with different things, and it will start to gel, and I think we'll have some of these conversations going forward.
Okay, because that would, just thinking of the central location, gym, library, if you had those separate.
Yes,
rooms,
yeah, and
you
that's
could
really
double up, and it wouldn't seem like a long corridor, you would have it more
absolutely.
compact.
And some of this too, once we establish the final grade level configuration of this building, we need to have that programming exercise one last time, because I don't think in any of the options previously we had 3rd grade in here. When we did the first North Yarmouth site, it was pre-K to 2.
Yep.
So we have a pretty good understanding, but we'll want to have one more pass with district leadership to make sure that we've got the right levels. In regards to your classrooms, what we did was we actually took a look kind of at the highest level going through the chart, and it ranged in that 10 to 11 range. So what we'll do once the grade level configurations are done, we'll estimate those out. We'll take a look at what we want to put in for a safety factor, whether it's enrollment plus 5%, something along that line to get us to a safe area for kind of those bubbles that may move through. Okay. And then we can work with the facilities committee and the board to determine exactly how many flex classrooms and other things that we had included in the last one, maybe in this one.
Okay, and my other question is, whether it's 2 schools or 1 school, pretty much is going to be the same cost.
No, I
I
don't think
that's, yeah.
I think, so one of the challenges that we have when we start splitting these out is, even if we don't do a full cafeteria or a gymnasium, there are a lot of inefficiencies by having a second building. So, it might be either a duplicated heating plant or something along the lines of piping between buildings that will add cost. Likely would be exterior wall, some roofs, things like that will certainly be more expensive. But some of this may be driven by site constraints as well. So that'll be something that we'll explore as we go forward. We can kind of take a look at what it actually means to have 2 facilities on that site at kind of a high level look.
And when they're looking at 2 separate facilities, you're considering 2 separate buildings?
Yes, I think
That's
option.
not considering a central location with wings. Like
Correct.
an atrium to like pre-K 1 and an atrium to like 2,
So
3.
in our mind, option 2 is pretty much what you're describing, that everything's under one roof and they're connected. It could be that we separated by either stairs to take kids to a different level or connector hallways. There's a lot of architectural things that we can do to make that early childhood center distinct and separate.
Okay,
But
and
still,
that's option 6?
that's option 2. 6, I believe, is the 2 standalone
Okay,
buildings.
perfect. I'm all set now.
Thank you. I just have a quick question, because the way that we've been sort of organizing and looking in this now, and it will make a difference, is the early childhood being pre-KK, and then the upper level being 1 through 3. So I just want to confirm that that's what we should be investigating and not bringing the first grade
Yes.
over.
Yes.
That's correct,
That's
okay.
how we've talked about it. And
Yes.
I just want to remind people that the goal of tonight is to talk about, or is to get to a place where we feel comfortable asking Oak Point to move forward with concept designs on a grade configuration. It doesn't mean that we have to choose whether or not that concept design is connected or separate.
Right.
And so we kind of have a cool opportunity right now to be able to look at these two options, assuming that people feel comfortable with this grade configuration, to have them give us two options of how that could look on the property. And I just wanted to mention one thing that came up, that when we were talking about concept designs at the facilities meeting, we had talked about having Oak Point highlight the areas that we would be able to expand 40 years, 50 years down the road, so that people know that we have room and that there's access to the exterior of the building. And I just want to make sure we mention that so we don't lose sight of that as well.
Absolutely. And the other thing that goes with that is if we know the areas where expansion is possible, we can either provide boilers with capacity or the expansion possibility. We put in infrastructure such as, oversizing a main distribution line to that point so that in the future, you're in good shape and it's not a lot of rework in those buildings. So those are all important things to do as we identify the expansion possibilities on that site.
Awesome. And I believe we've done similar planning at the Wilson School for that expansion as well. So I've got Tom and then Jason.
So I just wanted to return to Jennifer's line of questioning because I think she identified a compelling reason to have the new school as pre-K through 2, and then we would have 3, 4, and Mabel I. Wilson, which is Plan 1. And I'm wondering, I guess this is a question for Jeff and for Susie, what would the experience look like at Greeley Middle School integrating the 5th graders into, I guess, the 6 through 8 experience? Is that how that would play out?
Yes, and that is definitely one of the options that was looked at in terms of using the facilities and, 3, 4, I mean, honestly, we can make any grade configuration work educationally if we needed to. It wouldn't be our first choice educationally. I think Susie can talk about the 4th and 5th grade experience. But in terms of the 5th graders being part of a 6th through 8th grade building, typically in a 5-8 middle school, the 5th grade or the 5th and 6th graders are in a different location in the building. They're programmed separately. So whether it's 5th or 5th and 6th, typically 5-8. There's not a lot of 5-8 middle schools in Maine. And actually, there's one right next door, and I know that they're moving their 5th graders back to the elementary setting after many years of having 5th, I think 20 years now, having a 5th grade in a middle school setting. And the 5th grade at the Harrison Middle School is separate physically from the rest of the school, actually have their own part of the building. They use some of the same facilities, allied arts, et cetera, but they really are a self-contained setting in that middle school, whereas the rest of the 6-8 building operates much like ours does with a team approach, et cetera. So middle school, and it was built that way with knowing it would be a 5-8 building, that building was actually built in that way. Our facility at the current middle school does have that opportunity. We can have the 5th grade or 5th and 6th grade actually in a more, in their own setting in that building. But I think there's a lot of question marks about 5th grade programming in a middle school setting anyway, and whether 5th graders belong in a middle school and where they belong in elementary. And if you Google it, like many of us probably have, you will find lots of research on both that will support that 5th graders could be in a middle school if done correctly, and then there's tons, probably more of research saying 5th graders belong in an elementary setting. There was a time period within the last couple decades where it was okay to say 5th graders were considered, a middle school age group, and programming for them in a middle school would be okay. But I think there's been kind of a swing back saying 5th grade belongs in an elementary setting more. And I think educationally, there's obviously the 3 criteria, that are all very important. The educational component is, where do they best belong? And I would probably say elementary is where they would best belong. It doesn't mean that we couldn't make it work in a middle school setting. We could. It would have to be very carefully planned.
Susie, did you want to add anything to that?
Thank you. The only thing I would add, Tom, is because I've been here for a while, we've already, with the community, talked a lot about the last time we designed something, moving the fifth graders to the middle school, and that was not a popular choice for parents. It would change their, they go on the secondary route for buses, they'd be on buses with 12th graders potentially, those kinds of things parents didn't really like. And then the only other thing I can share is Mari Treblecock, who's our middle school principal, really emphasized that she does not feel fifth graders should be with sixth, seventh, and eighth graders, just developmentally from her experience. So I'll just add that.
Thank you. I remember that comment from her many times in our meetings. Jason.
Along the breakup of the grades in the new school, I'm not opposed to where we've sort of started pre-K, but I would hope maybe just as you're going through the process, Tyler, that we can look at all options, and I'm just thinking in terms of symmetry and the way the wings might work out. Our smallest group is pre-K, and that could just be like a tiny pod off from one wing or something, and in that case, K1 would group well, and then 2, 3 in the other wing or something like that. So I just don't want to take that off the table, how you guys are breaking it up, and I would second what Susie said on the other thing. I would, to the degree possible, delay the day that third graders have to join fourth and fifth graders, and I would choose also to delay the day that fifth graders have to join sixth, seventh, and eighth graders.
Thank you. All right. Kevin.
Thank you. It's always so good to see you. So a couple things. As you were speaking about that, I think on other designs, and you've done a few, you do that great job as you talked about the scaling for flexible expansion. And I remember we pushed on that quite a bit with you, and you were always making that very clear so that we could see that. I also like what you talked about is that forethought about where those expansion and what those systems would look like that aren't seen. I think that's a very smart approach. Again, being able to see your designs inside and outside, and we all got to see conceptual over here, but the way that you took the Rose School in Portland, the way that you took Falmouth and took very large facilities and made them feel very small and very intimate. I mean, small in the right way, so they weren't intimidating. The way that you used breakout spaces, I think, obviously, look, there's two things I know with absolute certainty. When we're talking about grade configurations, the principals have line of sight, and we should be listening to that. When it comes to design elements, I know that you have a demonstrated expertise in what you do. So I think that as we look at these options here, you can make that, if I'm playing along at home and looking at two where, yes, it would be a large building, but you can make it as small as it needs to be inside there so that the little feet aren't traveling too far from point A to point Z. So, I mean, especially just looking what you put together on the hill over here. It was masterful. And look at all this extra space you have to deal with. Could be very, very exciting.
Thank you. Peter, do you have any follow-up after hearing the discussion? Do you want to?
No, I think that it would still be my intent items for action to make a motion to approve the recommended grade configuration with 4-5 at Wilson, 6-8 middle school, and pre-K. And then with the intention to direct Oak Point to come up with a couple of conceptual models kind of based on the feedback that they've received from the board. And we wouldn't go too terribly down the lane before we had the board take a look and make sure that they felt that this was the right way. And my thought after that, once the board gives the general concept idea so that Oak Point can go ahead and do the details to get some kind of a cost element on a parallel line that we could, and we can talk about this in facilities later, but we reactivate a building committee to work with Oak Point that contains the same elements that we had in the one when we did North Yarmouth, where we have a combination of citizens, administrators, teachers, and board members to just further define so that we get the community and more bodies involved. It proved to be a very effective committee when we did it with North Yarmouth, and but before we get to that point, again, we want the board on board as far as what basic concept that we come up with. So that's kind of my thought on it, and I'm sticking to it.
Can I just say something? Can it be outlined from here going forward what the next votes will be?
Absolutely.
Think there's been some things that have been said tonight that I don't really have a clear understanding about what the next boxes we're going to check and what the board will oversee in any of that. So I think that would be helpful for me at least.
Absolutely. That'll be helpful, I think, for everybody. Anne, did you?
I was just going to add, since I haven't mentioned anything yet, coming into the meeting, going through the options, I was like, oh, 6. Like 6 is what I think, would be the best option, and I didn't understand how 2 won over it, and now I do. So I appreciate the conversation. And I like, though, that, since it's the same grade configuration, that me voting to support 2 doesn't preclude Oak Point from still looking into seeing if that would make sense financially and space-wise and all that. So I like this a lot, that it does give us these different options. And I like, hearing about these pods and knowing from how you structured the concept design for the campus. I mean, yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what you all are able to come up with.
Thank you. And I think what Peter and Ann just mentioned is the financial part of this conversation, which we have not talked a lot about this evening. And so I think it's really important that we make sure that that is a highlight of looking at what these concept designs are going to be during our next conversation. Shaking head. Facilities chair, finance chair.
And I think to add the financial prep and how much time and everything that Oak Point either is going to bill us or time that you're going to be spent looking at different options. I think we should be focused, help them focus to get the best bang for our buck, because we've already spent a lot of their time and our resources in our different options over the last few years. So we should keep that in mind.
Totally. Thank you, Jennifer. Ready?
I was going to say, if you wanted to have Peter take that out of order, it might fit with that well.
Peter, would you like to take, and I just want to offer one last time, knowing that a vote is on our way. Does anyone else have any additional questions?
Well, I would move to...
Hold on, Peter, hold on.
Oh, sorry.
Jennifer?
So the vote is going to be that we're voting on both having 2 separate buildings and looking at one building.
We're voting to ask to dictate a grade configuration, which is pre-K through 3, at least at the recommendation. And then with that vote, we are asking Oak Point to provide concept designs for that grade configuration in the best way that they can. It may look like 2 separate buildings, and it also may be one building that's with pods. That's really their role at this point.
Yeah.
Both 2 and 6 accomplish the same grade configuration. Am I not answering your question?
It seems like we're asking them to do two different
Yeah,
architectural
it's
designs.
very confusing.
Go ahead,
I think
Tyler.
for us that haven't been involved in the building committee or the facilities.
So what we had discussed at the Facilities Committee was not taking it through to the full concept design with the pretty pictures and video walkthrough, but as we're working through our process, we do a lot of high-level work such as bubble diagramming, massing out on the site, and before we get into those, the highly technical detailed drawings, kind of give you a few different options of how things could work on the site, and that's pretty normal, I think, for our design process. We'll show you 2 or 3, we'll have 40 on the cutting room floor back at the office, so that's how we had seen that piece going. Some of the things that we would be looking at each one of these major milestones, even at those kind of bubble diagram phases, is trying to dial in on the site development costs here. I think that's one of our bigger unknowns right now. We know what the water is, we know what the access road is, but actually developing the site with subsurface wastewater, all of those other components are kind of our big missing piece. So, those high-level looks we'll take a look at actually getting in, putting in the foundations, parking, all those supporting things, and then give you some rough ideas of what these buildings are going to cost. I think those are the things that'll help inform those decisions as we start to refine which of the options that we come back with. Does that help, or?
Again, the facilities committee recommendation is high school 9 to 12, middle school 8 to 6, grades 4 to 5 at Wilson, and pre-K through 3 at North Yarmouth. That is the recommendation of the Facilities Committee. So my motion is to approve the grade configurations for the proposed new school as recommended by the Facilities Committee. That's the motion.
Second.
Okay, so one last time for discussion. Jennifer, I want to make sure that you're clear on the vote.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay.
I might be able to offer something, but I don't know if it's something I should offer just in kind of conversation that Jennifer had.
Okay.
Is maybe that I'm just suggesting that we might want to add to the motion by the Facilities Committee and direct the architect to develop initial concept designs to be reviewed by the board early in the process or something along those lines. So in other words, as Tyler just mentioned, it's not taking concept design all the way through. It's bringing back some initial, okay, here's some a couple of rough designs, and possibly a ballpark cost. And when I say board, it really probably would go back to the facilities, and the finance committee, I would think, would have a joint meeting to discuss the design and the ballpark costs of a couple of initial designs, and then it would, make sure that the board is comfortable with that.
Well, Tyler, you're the other Facilities Committee member that's here tonight. Are you comfortable with that?
Yes, I am comfortable with that. I also saw Jason raise a hand, and I don't know,
Yes.
Kevin, if you'd like to add.
Jason?
So I think what Jennifer's struggling with is the same thing that you were saying in the facilities meeting. 2 and 6 are basically the same. So, and we went through the same process with the same concerns of asking Oak Point to do 2 things and sort of wasting money and potentially. So Tyler had said it wouldn't be that bad. It would be included in sort of the costs that have been outlaid so far, and because he wouldn't go very far down either path at this point. I think some people want to see what those incremental costs are to break it up. So I believe we're voting on going down the path to see where 2 and 6 end up, which are the same as far as grade configurations go, but we went through the same concerns in the meeting that Jennifer is voicing now.
But if I listen to what that motion is approving grade configurations for the proposed new school, and it looked like that you folks on facilities were advocating 2, correct?
I personally am advocating too. I don't believe that I personally will be able to justify the incremental cost just to make separate buildings. I'm hoping Oak Point can make it just as intimate under one roof, but that's the disconnect. Is there's some people that really want to see that incremental cost for extra buildings.
Yeah, I think, Jason, I think it speaks well that, yes, the implied thing for the facility is that we want to at least see a rough concept for the two, but we're not going to take it down a financial rabbit hole. We're going to, but I'm not sure that needs an amended motion, or does it? I will defer to the extinguished chairperson.
I'm okay with the way it is. I'm okay
Okay.
with the recommended vote.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it didn't sound like, Jeff's language didn't sound like it was proposing an amendment. It was just talking about what that deliverable is going to be, and those next steps that Jennifer spoke to.
Right, and it can be noted, if the board chooses, it can be noted in the minutes.
That's fine.
That would be great.
Instead of it being part of the motion, we can note
Okay.
that piece.
Keep as it is.
So the motion stands as read.
Okay, and Jason, you second, oh, I'm sorry, Avery, before we vote, you had another.
Yeah,
comment?
so are we still in the workshop, or have we moved to the items for action?
I'm glad you're paying attention. We have moved the first item for action out of order so that we can connect it to our workshop.
All right.
But thank you for asking.
Good question.
All right, any other further questions before we vote? All right, all in favor?
Thank you.
Great.
Who's the second? I'm
Jason.
sorry.
I did, Jason.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you, Oak Point. Thank you, Susie. Have a great night.
Susie, thank you.
Thanks, Susie.
We've tried to move our workshops up earlier so that we're all a bit more awake and you guys don't have to be here at 10 o'clock at night.
So Tyler, at some point, when I asked about having a future checklist on
Yep.
what this process is, how will that be communicated to us?
So and I was going to look it up while we were sitting here, but I felt like it was not efficient. We have put forth a few timelines. I know Jeff has put forth one, but maybe what you're asking for is specific votes that are associated with that timeline?
Yes.
Okay. So I need to sit down with that timeline and connect with Jeff
And I think,
about that.
because I looked up the timeline, I think having the timeline and have the specific votes and when the projected meetings to those,
Sure.
I think would be helpful, because I think that even this vote was, I think, last week kind of coming around, and then we're saying the people that are not on the facilities, I think I don't quite understand some of the things that are going on. So kind of having that, what the next benchmark would be.
Sure.
And what the vote would be, would help me.
Awesome.
Because this is the only forum where we're getting information from facilities.
Well, it's the only forum that we're talking about it, but we share a lot of information prior. So I want to make sure that, A, the information you're getting is something that you can digest and bring here and understand, but also I totally hear, and I don't think that there's anything that would keep us from mapping this out further, and I think it would be helpful to put meetings on the calendar for everybody, especially for public that wanted to participate, or other board members that wanted to participate in those as well.
I think the superintendent augmenting that Gantt chart that you created before certainly could absolutely meet what Jennifer's looking for, and it would help the community a tremendous amount.
In this chart that Kevin's referring to, I just threw up there on the screen, and I will work with Tyler to make sure that we have some sort of approximate board votes.
Okay. I mean, we're not going to hold it to it. I just think it would be a good thing for us to understand as we're moving through.
Yep.
I think it's a good exercise in just planning in general, so thank you. Thank you, everybody, for the conversation. It's appreciated. I appreciate the facilities committee as well. We've been working well together and appreciated brainstorming and also being able to come with recommendations. That's a big lift. What? Okay, so moving on, we will be doing our superintendent's report.
Yes. we have the superintendent's report tonight, and it's a little bit on the short side. We've only been back for a week since break, but we still have some great things going on. I wanted to share with the board just some things that are going on in the district right now. So we have a former student from Greeley who is a Greeley graduate, and I'm not going to be able to say his name correctly, but it's Mark Jasenius, thank you, is working with NASA on what is called the DART mission. And the DART mission is actually part of it's kind of a movie, I believe Deep Impact was the movie. There's been a couple movies around this topic. But basically heading off any sort of asteroid or anything that might come near to Earth in the next few hundred years, NASA's working on a project. And Mark is part of that project, and he is from Cumberland, or North Yarmouth, and went to the Greeley schools and credited his teachers for his interest in this topic and in preparing him for this, this project that he is working on with NASA. So it's very neat, very cool. I've asked Mark if he might be, might be interested in talking with students here. He seems very open to it. And we'd love to have him in and to do something with our students in the district talking about this project. Another one, this all seems to be space related, and 8th graders in their science classes over the last few weeks have been studying Earth's place in the universe, and they made a scalable design model where 1 foot equals over 3 million miles. And it was really neat to see this going to the middle school and just seeing like the Earth and the sun, within 1 foot of each other outdoors in the middle school. And then you have to go travel all the way down the sidewalk and go across the street over to the Wilson School and start seeing additional planets and other parts of the universe that are scaled to that. And watching younger students, 4th and 5th grade students, who are doing kind of like searches for these parts of the universe as part of their studies, and using the 8th grade science project as part of their learning as well, and taking notes. And I actually saw a class of 4th graders that were doing that just last week, and we're actually learning from the 8th grade projects and taking notes on it. So very exciting, a great project, a great way of taking a main learning result and really cutting it right down to size and making it realistic and doable. And I actually got a great sense of where things in the universe are just by walking a few of those myself. So I thought it was awesome. Here's just an example of the moon and the Earth right within a foot of each other, obviously, scalable wise in the universe. They're right next to each other. So I thought it was pretty cool. Great project from our 8th grade science teachers. As Tyler mentioned, we will continue putting this message out, but we will be having a facilitated public event, engagement event. We have started putting this out. Just going to keep putting it out. It'll be in the blog again on January 11th. We're very excited to be able to offer that. Last week was High School National French Week. And National French Week, students in our French 5 IB and AP courses participated in slam poetry, and it was a workshop that was offered at our high school. Only 25 schools, in all of the Americas, not just the United States, were chosen to participate. And Greeley obviously was one of them. It was coordinated by someone, a professor from Quebec, and she holds the title of the champion of the Slam World Cup of 2016. So kids got a really cool program with her, and I think it was a great event for them. So in-person concerts have returned now to this facility. We have a lot of concerts coming up in the next 2 weeks. We're really excited to be able to host our concerts again. It's been almost 2 years since there have been any public concerts held in this space. One of our first concerts was the 4th and 5th grade choral concert, which was coordinated by music teacher Bethany Perkins Hall. And here's a picture of 4th and 5th graders on the stage. And that was during a dress rehearsal, so you might see all those empty seats. Well, that was prior to the actual program, I believe. But we did have a fairly sizable audience, and we're expecting sizable audiences. Right now, we're at 50% capacity for this room, which is about 250 folks. So some really exciting things going on.
Awesome, thank you. I actually saw the students putting the moon sign in the ground, and I had no idea what was going on, so now I have a better understanding. All right, so now we will move into committee reports and start with Kevin and Finance.
Not much to report other than a meeting next Wednesday, the 15th. It's all up here.
Nice work.
Thank you.
Policy, Anne.
First, I wanted to mention that we have, a policy up for first read tonight, which is JLCB immunizations. This policy was being updated to include the additional requirement of the MCV4 vaccination at grades level 7 and 12, and it also removes the religious and philosophical exemptions, all of which are guided by state statute. We have met just before this meeting, and so this meeting and the past meeting, we've been discussing policy, ACAF, workplace bullying. It's a new policy, also from the state statute from the legislature. Thus far, we've had Jason Curry from the MEA who has joined us, and we anticipate some other voices who will also be joining us throughout the policy. We're still pretty early on that one. There's a lot of discussion before it'll be coming to the board.
Awesome, thank you. Curriculum. Jennifer.
Jason just had his hand up, I'm not sure.
Oh, I heard something, but I didn't see you. Go ahead.
What does that abbreviation stand for, just for people who don't have it in front of them? No, the immunization that's being added.
It has to do with...
meningococcal meningitis,
yeah,
right?
it's like quadrant.
Okay.
Quadrivalent
Yep.
meningococcal conjunctive
Yep.
vaccine.
Thank
Okay.
you. Yeah.
Didn't want any misinformation out there.
Thank you, Jason.
If I even pronounced it right.
Good.
Just slide that one in real quick.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anne. Curriculum?
For curriculum, our next meeting is January 6th, and there's no update from the last meeting that we had.
Okay, thank you. Anne, equity?
We had our first meeting with Lawrence Alexander on the 19th, which was very exciting. We were basically brainstorming kind of what the committee was hoping our January 11th public engagement event will be like, and obviously there'll be more discussion. The next equity meeting is on the 8th.
Actually, there's been some confusion on the dates. The next committee meeting is the 17th for the full committee.
Okay, thank you.
And we're assessing that out today, so we'll make sure that that's posted correctly today. Student reports.
Oh, wait, we have one more.
Oh,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Sorry, no. Student reports are before ad hoc.
Okay.
We have an additional facilities thing.
Do you want to, yeah, it's not on here. That's why I didn't. Okay, we'll do student reports, and then I'll go to you, Peter.
Perfect. I vowed to my fellow juniors to bring up junior privileges until something is done. I want to bring up the point that by allowing juniors to, good grades permitting, leave during study halls and lunch, we can reduce the potential of COVID transmission at the high school. Thank you.
I like your take. I wanted senior privileges as a junior as well, and only going 2 days last year, it would have been really nice. But the only thing that I really have to comment is because since we're right back from break, there's not a whole lot going on other than a lot of animosity between the seniors, juniors, and sophomores over parking. If anyone at home is watching, stay out of the senior lot.
Thank you, students. All right, Peter, facilities.
We had 3 additional items on our agenda in addition to the breakdown of grade configuration. The first was that it appears that there is a willingness and a capacity to run a natural gas line in North Yarmouth to service our school. All of our present heating facilities are run by natural gas, and so that is an encouraging note. Also, as a side note, we are going to be looking at additional energy efficiencies, and there's a totally energy efficient high school down in Massachusetts. I believe it's a high school, and at some point the facilities and maybe the building committee will take a look on that. The next item is that we will be making a presentation on the proposed North Yarmouth facility, I believe on the 14th to the Cumberland Town Council, and on the 15th to the North Yarmouth Board of Selectmen. I will be doing the facilities portion, and my distinguished person on my right will be doing the finance element of it. And finally, we are going to, when we come up for air, to begin to review our long-term facilities plan to get that updated to current conditions, current known conditions, and also related to the latest enrollment.
Thank you, Peter.
Could I ask a quick question, Peter? When you do the long-term facilities update, would it include athletic fields and play spaces as well?
Excuse me?
When you do the long-term facilities plan, in that plan, do we also include athletic fields?
Yes.
And play space? I'm just curious as
Yeah,
to.
every element of the facilities, of the pools, athletic fields,
Okay.
everything.
I just know that things have kind of switched around with all the portables that we have, and just like what the long-term, after we get over the portables, it'll just be nice to kind of see that in place.
Yeah, that's our intention, to do the whole thing.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, and the last, are you asking me? No, okay. The last update is an ad hoc committee update from the Wellness Committee, and Anne serves on that, so she's going to update us on that.
Yep, so we reviewed reports that came from two of our ad hoc committees, the mental health and work-life balance subcommittees, I mean. And a general theme is, you know, just that everyone is seeing that this year is a lot more challenging than I think folks were anticipating at the beginning of the year, and buildings are seeing an increase in concerning behaviors, and we are going to work on prioritizing social emotional learning and really wanting to remind everyone that learning goals are, you know, will look different this year.
Thank you. Okay, we will move into our items for action. We have already achieved the first one. So we are looking for a motion on a second read policy of JEA.
I recommend to approve policy JEA, compulsory attendance ages, as presented.
And a second?
Second.
And any discussion here? Avery?
Yeah, so for that, under exceptions to the compulsory attendance requirement, do all the numbers under section B have to be met to fulfill that requirement? And I think this is a question for Anne.
Let me see. Sorry. I'm sorry, Avery, can you repeat that question? I have the document up now.
Yeah, for JEA, under exceptions to the compulsory attendance requirement, for section B, there's a bunch of things listed off. They're numbered. Do all of those have to be fulfilled to meet that requirement?
Is it an and or an or? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, is it, like, do all of these have to, it refers to, like the exemption being for one of these sections as it states here.
Right, because the first
the
one is if
top.
they've graduated from high school before their 17th birthday, and then section B includes that they've
Yeah.
reached the age 15 or completed the ninth grade,
Yeah.
et cetera.
You know, reading what was drafted, it would appear to me that they're written as dependent statements with those
Yeah.
being attached with the and finally,
Yes.
point 6.
That's my understanding. Jeff, I don't know if there's anything that I'm missing there.
No, the student does have to obtain all of those areas in order to be graduated from high school.
All right, that's
so-
good to know.
And
Yes.
has the board ever approved something like this? Like, do we have this come forth that often?
We occasionally will have a student that will graduate early from high school, but it's based on credits and the
Right.
principal approving it, which is the
Right.
principal responsibility. So, and since I've been here, there's been no student that's come before the board for this
Okay.
purpose.
Good to know.
But because it's an option, we have to put it in there.
Yeah, and my apologies for not sending this to you before tonight, but I might recommend that we have the student's parent and/or guardian, just adding the guardian piece as well in cases where that meets the definition. And I'm talking specifically under point 6 of item B, and there may be other places where that appears. I think that we can approve and then still make that addition.
Yes, that was a good catch. Thank you. Yeah, guardian is a much more all-encompassing term than parent, so I would like to amend the motion then that we approve it with that change.
Yeah, and so there are a few, so just all changes.
Thank you. And a second for the amendment?
Second.
Thank you. Any other further questions? All right, all in favor? Great, thank you. Moving on, looking for a motion for a deletion of policy JEA-AR.
I recommend that we remove policy JEA-AR, compulsory attendance ages, from the policy manual. And again, for people, these deletions, this one, we merged the language with the policy that we just passed, so it is no longer needed.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion or questions? Okay, all in favor? Great, thank you. And moving to another deletion of policy IGD.
I recommend that we approve removing policy IGD, Sunday events, from the policy manual, and this deletion has been recommended by our council at Drummond and Woodson.
Great, and a second?
Second.
Any discussion or questions here? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. And a motion to delete policy JECB.
I recommend that we approve removing policy JECB, admission of non-citizen students, from the policy manual. Also recommended by Drummond and Woodson.
And a second.
Second.
And questions or discussions here? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. And you want to take the next one?
I recommend that we approve removing policy JICB, care of school property by students, from the policy manual. This information is included in the student handbook, and Drummond and Woodson has recommended approving the policy, deleting the policy.
Great, thank you. And a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Avery?
Yeah, I want to just ask the question, does that mean that the student handbooks are like an approved board policy? I don't know if that question makes any sense, or,
So are you saying that if the policy goes away, that
Yeah.
it's represented as a policy within the handbook? Is that what your question is?
yeah.
So whenever there's not a policy, in the absence of a policy, there can be a procedure. And so this would become a procedure that's in the handbook. And right now, Drummond and Whitson is actually reviewing all of the school handbooks. Routinely, we just ask them from time to time to do that, so they're just making sure all of the handbooks are in compliance and aligned to our policies.
All right.
But you don't have to have a policy to back up procedures, so this would just be a school procedure.
All right.
Thank you. All in favor? Great. So moving on, we are looking for a motion to enter executive session. Anybody would like to read that?
I move that we enter executive session to discuss negotiations between MSAD 51 school lunch workers and the MSAD 51 Board of Directors pursuant to state statute, MRSA 4056D.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Great. Thank you. Are we going to?
Okay, I'll take care of it, so.
All right, make this fast, will you? Fast motion.
All right, are we all set up top? Okay, thank you. So we are back from our first executive session and looking for a vote to ratify the 21-24 collective bargaining agreement between MSAD 51 collective bargain, oh, you want to read it, someone else?
You're doing fine.
Okay. Bargaining agreement between MSAD 51 school lunch workers and MSAD 51 board of directors.
I would vote to ratify the 2021 to 2024 collective bargaining agreement between MSAD 51 school lunch workers and the MSAD 51 board of directors.
Thank you. In a second.
Second.
Any questions? All in favor? Thank you. And then we will be looking for a motion to enter our second executive session. Someone could read that full motion. Item I.
I'll do it.
Thank you.
Vote to enter executive session to conduct the evaluation of the superintendent of schools and discuss superintendent's goal pursuant to state statute 1 MRSA 4056A.
Thank you. In a second.
I'll second.
All in favor?
No score.
Thanks, Peter. Okay.
How far in? 6 minutes left.
Ready when you guys are.
Yours for the motion, mine Doug.
Okay, thank you. All right, we are back from our second executive session this evening and looking for a motion for the next item for action, which is vote to extend the superintendent's contract. Would anyone like to make a motion for that?
Is that H?
I move to authorize the extension of the superintendent's contract.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
And any discussion or questions?
So can you tell me when does it end currently? What would the extension be? And just go over roughly the value to us in doing that, please.
I think the value might be different in different opinions. So I'll go through what is on the contract. The contract that was signed last year was from June 2020 to June 30th of 2023. So this would add an additional year, ending the next contract at June 30th, 2024.
So there's 2.5 years left in the contract, and by statute, we don't have to extend it, correct?
I don't know the answer to that fully, so I'd have to look back at that. I don't know if there's a statute related to this.
I can answer it. You do not have to.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Do we know if this is in line with surrounding towns on having a 3-year rolling contract?
Last time when I worked with Scott, I asked him to put together a comparison of other districts, similar to what he's done with a lot of other positions in the district, and it was very much in line with that. Any other questions? Okay. All in favor? Any opposed? And abstaining? Okay. Thank you. And then moving on, we are looking for a motion to vote to authorize the chair to negotiate 2022-23 salary and benefits with the superintendent.
I recommend to vote to authorize the chair to negotiate 2022 to 2023 salary and benefits with the superintendent.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
And questions or feedback? Yes, Jason?
Can you just, I already asked this question, but do you know why it's done this way and why the negotiating committee isn't involved or a subcommittee of such?
It has been done this way as a district procedure ever since I've been on the board. I don't know, Peter, if you have experienced something different.
No, it's been pretty much at least back to 2002. It's been done the same way.
Kevin?
And it's coming back to us to ratify after you land on that, correct?
Correct. Yep. Any other further questions? Okay. All in favor? And those opposed? Great, thank you. And then next, looking for a motion for the annual certification of the superintendent. If anyone would like to make a motion.
I recommend that we vote to approve the annual certification of the superintendent.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Any questions?
What does that mean?
It's part of our responsibility that there, in order for, and maybe you can describe this better, but there was a document that describes this in a lot of legal terms.
Yeah, at summarizing, just the Department of Education requires, at least at this point, to know who the superintendent will be or designated to be as of July 1st.
Oh.
That can change, but at least at this point, they like to know where the vacancies will be.
Okay. Any further questions? All right, all in favor? Thank you. And Jeff, I just want to say thank you. It's been a long year. We're here again. This is not the place to show all my gratitude, but I truly am grateful for all you've done for us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the support of the board.
And then lastly, a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So quick on that, every time.
Second.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Tom. All in favor? Thank you.